We're going to have a kind of panel, fireside, kind of a discussion about the relationship between religion and fertility. So we've got myself, Johnny Anomaly, and Malcolm and Simone. All right. I think Malcolm's...
Yeah. Oh, am I the one? So do you want me to like sit in a different position to like be...
However you'd like it.
Okay. Oh, yeah, okay, I'll just kick off the conversation, I guess. So, I mean, just to sort of talk about religion and fertility, when we started the Perinatalist Foundation and we were looking at what's causing fertility rates to decline, what causes higher fertility rates, there's like one thing that stands out in the data more than anything else. And it's, I think, really obvious to anyone who's thinking about this, which is the single biggest predictor of an individual's fertility, other than their income, which plays a pretty big role, is their religious/cultural group. Like, that is the determinant of individual fertility. It is like the core thing in fertility. There's a lot of little like side things, but because of that, it's a really important topic to dig into here. And so I'm really excited that you guys decided to put together a panel on it. But I'd love it, Kevin, actually, if you could start on this, you know, putting together this conference from a diversity of backgrounds. How did you think about the concept of religion and fertility, and how do you think about sort of the diversity of religious traditions represented here?
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest challenge that I see in the religion and fertility conversation is that the people who really believe in, you know, some sort of metaphysical, sort of non-empirical religious belief, they have this challenge of like, how much common ground can we have with people who really sincerely believe in something else, or who don't have a sincere kind of empirical or a non-empirical religious belief. And then on the other side, the difficulty that I see with the people who are sort of like the tech tribe, you know, very intelligent, sort of engineering mindset toward this thing, is they have this instrumental approach to it, which is like, well, gosh, religion is this incredibly valuable social technology. And if we could just, you know, tweak the puzzle box just the right way and just sort of adopt all of the religious beliefs that give us the right, like, +3 TFR bonus stats on our little video game fertility thing that we're doing, then you know, then we'll be set. And I just frankly don't think that that's how it works. I think religion generates sacrifice, as you mentioned, yeah, and thereby generates fertility in people who actually believe it, in people who actually buy it.
So this brings me to a really interesting question. So within many cultural groups that actually buy religion, you know, you will see falling fertility rates. How do you think about modifying their culture to increase fertility rates in the face of their culture being sort of laid out in sort of a divine context? Do you think that that's something that they're like, that they would be encouraged to look at, or do you think that it will be harder for those groups to adapt?
I mean, and I'm happy to pass the mic, yeah. but I mean, it seems to me that if you don't have an actual telos organized around the production of children, not just the reproduction of your culture, but like reproduction of children per se, like a way that fits into your metaphysics, then I think you're going to see like Shakers, in a sense, yeah, are very trad, right?
Yeah.
They had all sorts of like really, I don't know, old-timey religious beliefs, but because their telos had no place for sex and no place for children, they evaporated. And so I think you can't make it up. You can't like tell somebody, what if you believed some things that were more fertility-inducing? It's like, well, but I don't. And that, I mean, that goes for irreligious people too. Like, you can't tell irreligious people like, oh, you should believe in God because God will increase your sperm count. It's like, no, like that doesn't, and it wouldn't work even if you can't do that.
Yeah. Johnny, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I guess I had the idea for the panel a few days ago, in part because, one of the things that we first noticed over the last few hundred years, especially since the French Revolution, is, that wealth and fertility are inversely correlated, at least in liberal societies. And when you look around the world in both liberal and non-liberal societies, as we all know here and we've mentioned, religious personalities, and so by personality, I mean, I think there are personality traits from which religiosity comes, whether you're Muslim, Christian, Mormon, etc. Those are the best predictors both between and within countries of overall fertility. Evolutionary biologists and psychologists have now sort of argued, many of them anyway, that we are fundamentally a religious species. Yeah. That religion probably evolved, or religiosity, the tendency to want to believe in some overall telos, generally a pronatal telos, is probably evolutionarily adaptive, even if it doesn't latch on to reality. And I thought I'd read a quote from Jonathan Haidt. I used to assign, when I was a professor at Duke, I'd do these freshman reading groups. And almost every year, I assigned The Righteous Mind. Many of you guys have read that 2012 book. The subtitle is Why Good People Disagree About Politics and Religion. It's a book in evolutionary psychology. Mm-hmm. And he argues, an atheist, as he is, a liberal atheist, that we are fundamentally a religious species. Religion is adaptive. Darwin had the same thought. And one of the most striking, arresting passages in that book I thought I'd read, because I think it prompts this overall discussion. So, Haidt says, societies that forego the exoskeleton of religion should reflect carefully on what will happen to them over the next several generations. Mm-hmm. We really don't know because the first atheistic societies have only emerged in Europe in the last few decades. It's probably more like centuries. They are the least efficient societies ever known at turning resources into offspring. I like that way of putting it because, well, I think like an evolutionary biologist myself, I'm an atheist. I'm not proud of it. I'm not one of the new atheists. I share all of your goals. And so the real question is, well, there's a series of questions that I wanted to sort of prompt. Mm-hmm. One, is religion necessary or sufficient for boosting fertility rates? And I ask both because religion can be corrupted by politics, can be hijacked. And two, if religion is not necessary, and I don't know, it might be, is there any proxy for it? Is there anything that we can replace religion with that might serve the same function? And I'll mention just one possibility, but I wanted to actually kick off discussion rather than answering the question. Plato and Aristotle thought there were possibilities, although it tended to evolve around a common ethnicity, a common political society. They saw political societies as basically biomasses that produce more and better people, going back to India and Bronson. They saw religion as playing a role, but not a central role. They saw a telos for a certain kind of people, and they thought that was sufficient to reproduce and improve the societies they live in. Yeah. Anyway, so just a series of thoughts here about the role of religion, the adaptiveness of religion, and whether or not we need it or something like it to boost fertility.
Yeah, Simon, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but before I pass the mic to you, I just thought framing-wise, so people understand that the three different groups here and the three different perspectives on religion, Mormon, atheist, created religion, like born atheist, and then we created a religion. So I'd both like you to ask answer his question, but also talk about like, do we, living in this weird religion we created, do you feel like we really believe it in the same way religious people believe it, or do you think that it's sort of like we're just playing with dials?
Sorry, speaking to the mic.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I grew up definitely very atheist, and I am surprised by the way that I got God, to use a term that was from a Starship Troopers sequel. I just so quickly glommed on to having a strong sense of culture and religion that I realized that throughout my life I really craved it and really wanted it. And then as soon as I had it, I was so much stronger as a person. I was able to get over my anxieties. I was able to do so much more that I wasn't able to do before, because when you've got God, you have something stronger and bigger than yourself that enables you to do things that you could not do as an individual. So I think what's really interesting for us, at least, and this is quite different, and I really want to hear, Kevin, what you've experienced, and also, Johnny, I want to hear what your experience has been. Normally, I would assume that religion would be about first finding faith in some kind of God or deity, and then finding everything follows. All the culture follows. All the tradition follows. But what we did was somewhat the opposite. We very intentionally developed a set of values and practices, and then a sort of a metaphysical belief that we thought was logically consistent. It's kind of like the hard science fiction of religion, where we're like, technically, scientifically, this could be true, and therefore, like, that's what we're going to use as our descendant worship religion. But then we actually found that the faith followed all of these strange traditions that we artificially developed. So now, when things happen, we turn to each other and we're like, it was the future police. And we believe it. And it's really interesting to see how that happened. I feel like there's an evolutionary element to this, where we were sort of evolved to have this faith and evolved to lean into it. And it's fun to see how that was created. But I want to see how that's worked out for you guys.
Well, so your religion, as I understand it, is basically represented in the movie Interstellar.
Oh, I haven't seen that movie, so I don't know.
You haven't?
No.
So in Interstellar, the premise, well, I don't want to spoil it. Anybody not seen Interstellar? But the premise is that extremely powerful beings beyond time and space sort of help to save humanity in its hour of direst need.
Yeah, future police.
Right,
yeah.
right. And if you talk to Latter-day Saints who have seen that movie, they'll be like, it's flipping a couple of things. It's sort of like there's a little bit of like maybe garbling or something, but it's like that's kind of our movie. There's a lot of in terms of like the destiny of humankind to become that kind of transcendent being, and the way that you are involved in shepherding your descendants to that outcome, and the way that your ancestors are involved in getting you there, and tied into this great chain of being.
Yeah.
And it's like, I guess I would argue that I just don't believe that you manufactured that.
No, we don't believe it either. It was gifted to us by the divine being.
Right. So I guess, I think I would say like, it's not so much like, is religion necessary or sufficient? It's more about like, absolutely everybody has something that they believe defines what it's all about. And for a lot of people, maybe like a dangerous fraction of people, that answer is nothing. It's an active belief in like nihilism. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is sort of what is behind the sort of destructive and self-destructive character of what you guys would call the urban monoculture. And basically the people that I sort of want to see succeed are the people who either have a positive answer to that question or are seeking a positive answer to that question.
It's very interesting. I mean, I would argue that the urban monoculture is driven primarily by something worse than nihilism, which is negative utilitarianism. If people aren't familiar with negative utilitarianism, it's the belief that negative emotions have negative value, but positive emotions don't have positive value. It's laid out in David Benatar's work and stuff like that. Essentially, sometimes when I'm in a ultra-progressive party or something like that, and I mention declining birth rates, I'll hear from somebody, but is it really that bad if humans go extinct? So I actually think that this is a more mainstream belief system than like we pretend as a culture. Like the planet would be better and the universe would be better without any sentient life.
Which is just pain. I don't believe that's rooted in any kind of like factual empirical analysis of anything. I think in my opener when I talked about sort of needing to close some psychological loops, I think that's all that is. I think it's just pain.
Yeah, well, like you, I want to support any group that is open to a pluralistic and flourishing human species. But Johnny, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I was going to ask a question. I think we should open it up to the audience too, but I wanted to ask Kevin whether or not you think that there could be something that served the role of religion that, for example, we know religion's not sufficient to produce the kind of outcomes that you're interested in. I mean, you go to churches now and you see, progress flags and, anti-natalist talk all the time. So it's not clear that just being religious or being part of a tradition is going to guarantee that.
Real religion has never been tried.
Right, exactly, yeah. So I wonder whether there's, there was a movement 100 years ago, George Bernard Shaw, Francis Galton, and I don't mean eugenics per se, but I do mean that was part of it. But they thought they could create something like a secular religion that was concerned with, 500 years, 1,000 years, building civilizations, building great people, as Indian put it. Do you think something like that could work, or does it involve necessarily a kind of God, a great chain of being, an overall metaphysical conception?
I think that's either sort of the Straussian, like Plato's Great Lie, or it's Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor. Are you familiar with the Grand Inquisitor?
Of course, I almost quoted from it, yeah.
Right.
Could you explain that?
So the Grand Inquisitor in Dostoevsky is basically sort of, he tells a story in Brothers Karamazov where the Grand Inquisitor meets Christ. Christ comes to the Grand Inquisitor in, I think, Spain. And basically, the Grand Inquisitor says, actually, it'd be better if you weren't here, if you went away, because we've actually got this all figured out. We've actually got the answers. And your thing is like disruptive. It causes people lots of psychological pain. And most of them are going to hell anyway. And therefore, like, just let us sort of shepherd them to a peaceful quietus. And I think I don't think that it can be built on a foundation of lies because, I mean, for one thing, if you have this thesis that like the smart people need to be telling the lies and the stupid people need to be believing them, then who's gonna have the babies? It's gonna be the stupid people. So I mean, like just from like a particular, like not even saying like, of course it's abhorrent. It's a disgusting idea to me, like psychologically, but also it doesn't work.
Well, so Johnny, I'm very curious. I mean, you are an atheist, not proud of it, but do you plan on choosing a religion, selecting a religion, or are you more along this, like, I'm going to create an atheist framework and live by that and have that be what guides me to have children and raise them in a culture?
Yeah, I don't consider atheism part of my identity. That's, I guess agnosticism is where I technically am, but, well, to channel the aforementioned George Bernard Shaw, at the end of his Man and Superman, one of the characters says to another character, they're actually in hell, and there's a dialogue in hell. It's Act 3. And he says, the fact that religion makes people happy is no more to the point than the fact that, the drunken man is happier than the sober one.
Sure.
And I think the point is that religion has to be sincere, or the set of commitments, whether they mimic religion or the real thing, have to be sincere for them to actually motivate action. So
100%.
Well, but in terms of motivating action, right? Yeah. So we don't see, if you have 10 kids, you've done nothing. You've done no more than having one kid if none of those kids have grandkids. And if they don't, pass on their culture, culturally, you've done nothing. So it's really, you're looking at your grandkids, you're looking at your great-grandkids. In what kind of culture or moral framework will you raise your children in the absence of religion? Because I love exploring
holidays,
holidays, et cetera, values, in order to get those great-grandkids.
Yeah, them being part of a great civilization, part of a great group. And yeah, I won't specify more about that until tomorrow. Because I have not.
Stay tuned.
But I'd love to take this to the audience because it's the last minute here. Do we have any questions?
I sniped you, sorry. I was just curious, I think you touched on it a little peripherally, but how do you tease apart religion versus community? Because I think a lot of, from my perspective, things that we've lost are community things. They're like, you can't date someone you work with anymore. It's very difficult to date someone at college even. So all these things are fraught, and small towns don't exist anymore. So I think that religion is a proxy for community in a lot of different ways, and I'm curious how you tease that apart.
I think the ways that community, as you'd say, it would make this easier is by reducing, I hate talking about it the instrumental way, but like it reduces friction, right? When I was dating girls at BYU, there were all sorts of things that were understood and went unsaid, and you could sort of figure out whether or not you aligned within a much narrower band, right? Whereas now everybody's encouraged to like synthesize their own values from stellar hydrogen, and most people are terrible at it. And you like, and so you're just sort of walking like, okay, is this person who has tried to do that one of the 99.9 percentile people who can actually do that capably? And no. And so like that I think is what causes sort of the despair around trying to date outside of that kind of a framework. But really, having those kinds of common answers, it's like, explain to me how that is different from religion. Like we're talking about these things as if they're distinct, but I'm not convinced that they are.
So when I hear people complain about community, one of the things that always shocks me about this is how often they live in environments that traditionally people would think of as community. Like they'll be in like a polyamorous group house or something like that, and they'll be complaining about community. And I'm like, well, you live around way more people than I do. When I see people in religious ecosystems, I almost never see them complain about community. So I think this complaint about community is a misplaced complaint. One of the things that he mentioned is our like cultural beliefs about religion are very different. And yet I would think, as you said, you think that like we sort of follow the same metaphysical framework in that we both believe that we were likely originally inspired, or our belief systems were originally inspired by the same great power, right? But the cultural way that we relate to that is different. And so I think that you can have different cultures within sort of a similar religious umbrella.
I think we have time for one more.
Thanks. I never heard anyone define religion. I feel like that's actually part of what is at stake in the conversation. And to the point that we that was just responded to, it does seem like any bond between any people that has some sort of metaphysical value at the bottom of it qualifies as religion. So that's one thing. The other is that it doesn't seem like any of our sort of traditional religions hold the same kind of traditional power that they once did. And in a way, it does seem like there needs to be invention. There needs to be a recreation that happens in every one of our families. Even those of us who are Catholic need to recreate what Lent looks like for ourselves in some way. So I guess I'd like to hear your guys' response to that.
I would say, I like the point, the first one in particular. But
He wants to add to this. Can I just have him add to this?
Okay.
Oh, just last thing. One thing I just want to emphasize is that my sense is, and I think a really excellent point was made about the comparison between the Shakers and others. It's not enough to have just simple religious belief. You actually have to, we kind of take our pronatalism for granted, but it's actually not even a baseline in our culture right now. You know what I mean? I mean, there hasn't even been a U.S. president that has ever urged people to please have kids. That has never occurred in history. So we're just the kind of, so we're kind of, our society is almost like the Shakers. It's just not, like pronatalism isn't even a part of our broad cultural message. So within faith and outside of faith, I think injecting pronatalism is kind of a beginning stage that we haven't even gotten to as a broad society yet. I'm done.
Yeah. All right, so respond to those two.
Yeah, well, back to the first point first. It strikes me that religion isn't quite a proxy for a community, although it can be. I think it's more the cement of society, or the kind of glue that keeps a community together. And I would say, contrary to your first point, that there is a difference between, well, probably the difference between religion and mere culture. Culture can bind communities. It can embody various kinds of knowledge. That's what Hayek thought culture was for. It helps us economize on knowledge, reduce transaction costs, whether it's in the dating market or elsewhere. But there's a big difference, and that is true religion usually involves a metaphysics that involves some supernatural belief. It doesn't have to, but it typically does. And more importantly, and this is what Dostoevsky emphasizes in The Grand Inquisitor, is it involves a deep sense of meaning. And it's meaning well beyond ourselves, well beyond any kind of material goals that we might have. And that, I think, is really difficult to replace. And so in that sense, I like your point, but I actually disagree. And I think religion is very different than everything else that binds communities or that might get us to, I don't know, breed or any of the other goals that people have here. So anyway, that's a thought on that.
Yeah, so it looks like we are, we are over time, but actually it looks like Diana is taking care of her baby. So maybe we can either go to break or we can keep the conversation going. Let's see. If we go to break, we need to be, no, we can
do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'll go to break.